Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. I want to tell you the story of how one community in New York became the front line in a fight over crypto mining, and why that same story is now playing out with AI data centers. And while the technology has changed, many of the impacts haven't. The lessons we learned in the Finger Lakes are becoming increasingly relevant for communities across New York and across the country. So let's take some time to understand what AI data centers actually are. Data centers themselves aren't new. They've been around for decades and are used by hospitals, universities, governments, banks, and telecommunications companies to store and process information. They're the physical infrastructure behind the internet, housing thousands of computer servers, storage systems, and networking equipment that power everything from email and video streaming to online banking and social media. What's changed is that we are now seeing a rapid build-out of much larger, more energy-intensive facilities designed specifically to power artificial intelligence. These AI data centers are becoming the backbone of the AI boom, and they're changing the conversation around energy, water, and infrastructure in ways we've never seen before. Here's how experts generally distinguish between the three types of facilities. A traditional data center is primarily designed to store and move information. So every time you stream a movie, save photos on the cloud, send an email, visit a website, there's a data center somewhere helping make that happen. Traditional data centers have been a part of our lives for decades. They support, again, those hospitals, banks, universities, businesses, and the internet as we know it. And the electricity and water consumption for traditional data centers like this has remained relatively flat and consistent over time. Those facilities have become an essential part of modern life, and they've existed for many years without drawing much public attention. AI data centers, however, are different. Instead of simply storing information, they are constantly performing massive amounts of computation to train and run artificial intelligence models. That requires far more powerful computer chips, much more electricity, and much more cooling than traditional cloud computing ever did. Crypto mining facilities are also often called data centers, but they function differently in that they don't store data. They are relatively simple machines that spend 24 hours a day guessing and throwing away numbers in order to earn a Bitcoin, which is virtual money, money that is often used for nefarious purposes because it is more difficult to track. AI data centers and crypto mining facilities are what we call hyperscale users. They operate at an entirely different level of electricity, water, and infrastructure demand. And that's the distinction I want you to remember. Because from a community perspective, the question isn't simply, is this a data center? The question is, what kind of a data center is it? How much power will it require? And what will that mean for the people who live nearby? Because that's where we begin to see very different impacts. So what exactly does hyperscale mean? The industry uses that term to describe facilities with extraordinary computing capacity and an enormous power demand. Most consume more than 100 megawatts of electricity. That's roughly enough to power 80,000 homes. Some of the newest AI campuses being proposed are approaching 1 gigawatt of demand, or nearly enough electricity to power 900,000 homes. So that's not just another commercial development, that's major energy infrastructure. And these aren't small server rooms or buildings, they're enormous industrial campuses designed to support companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, OpenAI, as they race to build the next generation of AI. One thing that's important to understand is that this is not just happening in New York. Data centers are being proposed in communities all across the country. Some are clustered in places with existing technology infrastructure, but increasingly we're seeing proposals in rural communities because they have available land, access to electricity, and this one's important, in many cases, fewer local regulations. These aren't isolated projects anymore. They're part of a nationwide build-out that is happening at an extraordinary pace. People often ask why AI needs so much electricity, and the answer is actually pretty simple. AI models require thousands of specialized computer chips working simultaneously 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those chips perform calculations every second, generating an enormous amount of heat in the process. The electricity isn't just powering the computers themselves, it's also powering the cooling systems, networking equipment, backup systems, and everything else required to keep these facilities running continuously. The numbers are staggering. Facilities typically contain tens of thousands of computer servers and can be anywhere from 10,000 square feet to as large as 1 million square feet in size. That's 17 football fields or 22 acres in size, for a comparison. According to the Department of Energy, data centers consumed about 4.4% of all electricity generated in 2023. By 2028, that number is expected to grow anywhere between nearly 7 and 12%. To put that into perspective, this is one of the fastest growing sources of electricity demand in the entire country. AI is changing not only how we use technology, but how we plan for the future of our electric grid. So think about what that means for New York. We already have some of the highest electricity costs in the country. At the same time, we are trying to electrify our buildings, our vehicles, and our economy as we transition away from fossil fuels. As of July 2025, you'll notice that the highest amount of large load applications in the queue are for projects right here in central New York. And these include the Greenwich facility on Seneca Lake, the proposed facility in Lansing along Cayuga Lake, and Micron. Today, that number is even greater, with record-breaking requests for large load electrical supplies through the New York Independent Systems Operator. This new electricity demand is equivalent to supplying power to every New York household in the state. Every new hyperscale data center becomes another major demand on the grid that's already under pressure. So the question isn't just whether we can build AI, it's whether we're building it in a way that supports or hinders New York's electricity needs, and whether this kind of development helps us meet our climate goals or undermines them.
Is it okay to ask a question?
We're going to do Q&A at the end, if that's okay. So that naturally raises an important question. Where will all of that electricity come from? Data centers don't create electricity, they consume it. That means utilities have to generate more power, build more transmission lines, expand substations, and in many cases keep aging fossil fuel infrastructure operating longer than originally planned. More and more, we're seeing data centers built alongside energy infrastructure because access to reliable energy has become one of the industry's most valuable assets. And that's why data centers need to be seen as harmful energy infrastructure. They don't exist in isolation. They feed on power plants, substations, transmission lines, and increasingly new fossil fuel generation to support them. We've worked too hard in New York to move away from fossil fuels. We banned fracking. We passed one of the strongest climate laws in the country. We enshrined the right to clean air and water in our state constitution. We should not allow unchecked AI expansion to move us backwards. Governor Hochul and Donald Trump are even embracing a resurgence in nuclear development, largely as a way to fuel data center development. And this is having an impact right here in the Finger Lakes, where a small nuclear reactor was recently proposed to power a data center in Schuyler County at the southern end of Seneca Lake. That's about a mile or so as the crow flies from Watkins International Racetrack and the world-famous Watkins Glen Gorge. So Joseph is my partner, Joseph Campbell, president of Seneca Lake Guardian over there. He has a QR code that I'm asking him to pass out and for you to please sign a letter urging Schuyler County to rescind that bid for nuclear development, if you will, if you consider it. Because despite the Climate Action Council's warning that nuclear power is the most costly, the slowest to deploy, and the most risky in terms of security and radioactive waste, and that it does not fit into our renewable energy climate solutions plan, 8 communities in New York State raised their hand for nuclear development this past January. So, unfortunately, electricity is the only one part of the story. As these computer chips work, they generate enormous amounts of heat. To prevent equipment from overheating, data centers rely on cooling systems. Depending on the design, that cooling may rely on direct water cooling, evaporative cooling, and energy-intensive mechanical chillers. Regardless of the technology, cooling requires significant resources. Water demand from data centers has increased dramatically over the last decade. Nationally, water consumption by data centers has more than tripled since 2014. By 2028, US data centers could consume as much as 720 billion gallons of water every year just to cool AI servers. That's enough water to meet the indoor needs of approximately 18.5 million American households. What's important to remember is that these numbers often only reflect the water used at the data center itself. Additional water is also required to generate the electricity that power these facilities. In fact, while not required to report, indirect water consumption for data centers has historically been about 12 times as great as the amount they directly consume. Oh, I jumped ahead. So where will the water come from? Just like electricity, water has to come from somewhere. It comes from our lakes, rivers, reservoirs, aquifers, and municipal water systems that communities already rely on. As more AI facilities are proposed, Communities are rightfully asking whether local water supplies can support projects of this size, particularly during droughts or periods of rapid growth. These are questions that deserve answers before projects are approved, not after construction has already begun. Here in the Finger Lakes, we know what clean water means. It's our lakes, our rivers, our drinking water, our farms, our tourism economy. So when companies ask to build facilities that consume enormous amounts of water, communities deserve to know exactly what that means before permits are approved. And just when you think it can't get worse, electricity and water are only part of the picture. Residents across the country are also raising concerns about industrial noise impacting their health and the health of animals and livestock, concerns about backup diesel generators, air pollution, land use, decreasing property values, and declining quality of life. And of course, climate. To us, burning more fossil fuels and eating up every renewable electron to serve these massive warehouses of computers that harm our planet and increase surveillance on American citizens in the middle of a global climate crisis is not only irresponsible, it's insane. These hyperscale data centers are costing us millions in increased electric bills. In some areas where they're located, people's rates have gone up 267%. And while these corporations often come into a community with the promise of jobs and tax revenue, those jobs are primarily temporary construction jobs. Once a facility is up and running, it might employ about the same number of people that your average McDonald's would. And we're already seeing that with this growth, many of the jobs we have now are being replaced by AI, thereby decreasing the number of job opportunities for real live people. Many of these projects move through the planning process with very little public awareness. Companies frequently operate under shell corporations or negotiate non-disclosure agreements, meaning communities often don't learn the full details until major decisions have already been made. And they get tax incentives and breaks that don't help communities' bottom lines. So here's what we've learned. Communities almost never oppose these projects because of just one issue. It's never just the electricity or the water or the noise. It's all of it together. It's industrial noise operating 24 hours a day. It's backup diesel generators. It's light pollution. It's land use issues. It's air quality. It's watching your community change without ever feeling like you've had a meaningful voice in the process. So I want to leave you with one important point before we move on. AI data centers aren't simply larger versions of the data centers we've lived with for years. They're built for a completely different purpose, and because of that, they consume significantly more electricity and significantly more water. And as that AI demand continues to grow, these infrastructure demands will continue growing too. And so that's where our community's story begins. At this point, you may be wondering what Bitcoin has to do with AI data centers. I sort of explained that in the first few slides, but it's a fair question. So to answer it, I'd like to take you back several years before ChatGPT became a household name. Because my community on Seneca Lake has already lived through many of these same questions. And our story began with a company called Greenwich Generation. As we know, the Finger Lakes is known for its clean water, world-class vineyards, agriculture, tourism, and small businesses. Agriculture and tourism makes up 17% of our state's economy. And in the Finger Lakes, it supports 60,000 jobs and brings $4 billion into New York State's economy annually. And all of these small business owners rely heavily on clean air and clean water for survival. For us, protecting the environment is just as much about conservation as it is about protecting the foundation of our local economy and our quality of life. Enter the Greenwich Power Plant, stage left. Greenwich was an old coal-fired power plant along the shores of beautiful Seneca Lake that had been shut down with an already bad environmental history. It was resurrected as a gas-fired plant, which the new owners promised would only operate as a peaker plant to supply power to the public in times of high demand. But very shortly after they began operating, they started installing Bitcoin mining machines, causing an increase of 700% from historical use for a privately owned Bitcoin company, which would consume enough power to fuel more than 90,000 homes. Also, 2 millionaires from Connecticut could generate 5 Bitcoins per day. These slick owners had lured this rural community into welcoming this facility through the promise of jobs and tax revenue that have never panned out. So let's be clear, this is an out-of-state Bitcoin corporation that bought an entire power plant to fuel over 30,000 machines for crypto. This is what we call behind-the-meter or on-site generation, and both crypto mining and AI data centers are using this. And this kind of a deal is very attractive to hyperscalers. Greenwich is allowed to withdraw 139 million gallons of Seneca Lake water every single day, and then dump it back in hot at temperatures up to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. This can be extremely harmful to the fish and the health of our lake, and can lead to toxic algal blooms, where 100,000 people rely on that water to drink. The increased noise levels not only drown out the natural peaceful quality of life for people in the surrounding area, but also across the lake, since noise travels easily across open water. By 2025, this facility was emitting 802,404,000 pounds of CO2 equivalents for the year, which is comparable to 170,000 cars on the road. And remember, before Greenwich bought the power plant, it was not operating at all. And therefore, there were absolutely no emissions or pollution. And you'll also notice that their original promise of operating only 6% of the year to burning frack gas almost every single day. Not only is this facility undermining our climate goals, but it is also raining toxins like formaldehyde, lead, toluene, and mercury over our homes, farms, vineyards, and lake every single day. And here's the astonishing part. Their state-required air permit was denied by the DEC for violating New York's climate law. Despite their denial being upheld twice during Greenwich's appeal process, they continue to keep operating and keep harming the region's air, water, and economy. Meanwhile, Greenwich became the test case in the state of New York for how other underutilized or decommissioned power plants would fall across the state. And thanks to many citizens, elected officials, and statewide organizations who saw the harms of this predatory industry, we passed a statewide moratorium on resurrecting fossil fuel power plants for Bitcoin mining while an environmental study was completed. But despite all of these efforts and against her own DEC's ruling, Governor Hochul, in a stunning reversal, disrupted the legal process and green-lighted Greenwich's continuation. This has emboldened Greenwich to add an AI data center on site. Now, not only producing 106 megawatts of energy from its fracked gas power plant, but also planning to draw a total of 260 additional megawatts from the grid, tripling its energy consumption. It became very clear to us that those near Greenwich weren't going to be the last community facing this fight. We started getting calls from people all over the country: Texas, Nebraska, Kentucky, North Carolina, people saying, this is happening in our community too. So that's why we formed the National Coalition Against Cryptomining. And as crypto mining companies began rebranding themselves as AI companies, we expanded our work because we realized the questions communities were asking hadn't changed. So again, not only are these energy-intensive industries burning excessive amounts of fossil fuel to feed their greed, but they are also scarfing up every precious green electron that could otherwise be used by the public while we transition to renewable energy. It's the Wild West for both crypto mining and AI data centers here, with very little environmental oversight or regulation. And we're fighting against a nefarious industry with as much lobbying dollars as the pharmaceutical industry. One of the biggest misconceptions we hear is that crypto mining and AI data centers are completely different industries. In reality, they're much more connected than people realize. The workload inside the building has changed, but much of the infrastructure has not. Both rely on enormous amounts of electricity, both require extensive cooling, both depend on access to substations, transmission lines, and other energy infrastructure, both place demands on local water resources, and both can fundamentally change the communities where they're built. Whether a facility is branded as a crypto mine, an AI data center, or a digital infrastructure campus, residents often experience many of the same impacts. The technology has changed, the infrastructure hasn't. So why are so many crypto mining companies suddenly becoming AI companies? There are really three reasons. First is access to the grid. Bitcoin mining companies spent years acquiring something that's become incredibly valuable in the AI era: large amounts of available electricity. According to industry analysts, those existing power footprints are now worth even more for AI than they were for Bitcoin mining. Second is economics. Right now, AI is simply more profitable. Investors have rewarded companies that reposition themselves as AI companies because AI offers more stable long-term revenue than cryptocurrency. And the third thing is speed. Building a brand new AI campus can take years. Existing crypto mining facilities already have that land, that power, infrastructure, and those permits in place, allowing companies to move much faster. The problem is that changing the name on the building doesn't necessarily change the impacts to surrounding communities. And this is the point I hope you will remember long after today's presentation. Just as big tech needs big oil to supply power for the next generation of AI data centers, big oil increasingly needs big tech to create the demand that justifies expanding fossil fuel generation and infrastructure. This relationship has enormous implications for our climate goals. If you take one thing away from my presentation today, let it be this. This conversation isn't just about AI, it's about the future of our energy system, our climate, and whether innovation will move forward with the transparency and accountability our communities deserve. Now, after I've got you all completely depressed, I want to let you know that we are not giving up. You might think that this is an impossible fight, but it isn't. The good news is that communities across the country are paying attention. They're asking better questions, demanding transparency, showing up at public meetings, organizing their neighbors, and making sure elected officials understand what's at stake. We are voting out decision makers who favor corporations over people. Communities have more power than they often realize, especially when they work together. And we're already seeing that momentum growing in New York. This year, the state legislature passed the Responsible Data Center Act, making New York the first state in the country to pass statewide legislation establishing a moratorium on large-scale data centers while stronger standards are developed. Our coalition worked alongside residents, advocates, and lawmakers to help build public support for this effort, but Governor Hochul has yet to sign this bill. On July 14th, instead, Governor Hochul signed an executive order putting up to a one-year moratorium on most new data centers. While we're still digging into how this differs from the legislation, it is a start. But we will continue to push her to sign that bill into law, because now is the time to establish lasting guardrails that protect communities, strengthen transparency, and ensure New York's climate commitments aren't undermined by unchecked data center expansion. These victories didn't happen by accident. They happened because communities got involved. The Finger Lakes has taught us something important. Innovation does not have to come at the expense of communities. Economic development doesn't have to come at the expense of clean air, clean water, or affordable electricity. But those outcomes don't happen automatically. They're the result of people showing up, asking questions, and insisting that their voices be heard. It's up to all of us to fight for our shared environments here in New York and across the country. People often ask where they should start. I would say start by organizing locally before a project is even proposed. Talk to your neighbors before decisions are made. Build a public conversation. Write letters, engage in social media, and help educate your community about what's being proposed. Connect with organizations that have been through this before. No community should have to start from scratch at this point. There are advocates, technical experts, attorneys, and grassroots leaders across the country who are ready to help. Most importantly, don't wait until a project is proposed. The earlier communities get involved, the more influence you have over the outcome. Looking around this room, I know many of you care deeply about climate action. What gives me hope is that this movement is growing every day. We've seen communities in red states and blue states come together around the same concerns. We've seen residents defeat projects, win moratoriums, influence legislation, and hold elected officials accountable. So I hope you leave today understanding not only what AI data centers are, but why communities across the country are asking hard questions about where they're built, how they operate, and who bears the cost. I want to thank you again for inviting me to share our story. The Finger Lakes may be where this story began, but it's no longer just our story. It's a story that belongs to all of us. So thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you.